Rain hammered Manhattan like it had a grudge, drowning the gutters and turning every sidewalk into a cold, black mirror. William Ashford pushed through the revolving door of the Ashford Grand, with a bouquet of white lilies pressed against his chest and an old navy coat buttoned to the throat. The elbows were worn soft, the shoes were soaked through. He crossed the gleaming lobby without hurrying, set the flowers on the front desk, and asked for a single room. The receptionist looked him over one slow sweep shoes to collar and smiled. "I'm sorry, sir. We're fully booked this evening." Behind her, the booking screen glowed with rows of open green squares. 40 seconds later, a couple in matching cashmere swept through the same door. The keycard for the presidential suite was already in her hand. William said nothing. He didn't leave. He stood at that counter, flowers between his hands, and the look on his face was the most unreadable thing in the room. The lobby of the Ashford Grand was exactly the kind of place that made people stand up straighter the moment they walked in. 40-foot ceilings, chandeliers that threw warm gold light across Italian stone floors, a grand staircase curving up to the mezzanine like an outstretched arm. Every surface polished to the point where you could see yourself coming from 20 feet away. Even the air felt considered faintly warm, carrying the quiet suggestion of cedar and something floral that was never quite identifiable, but always pleasant. It was the kind of place that had been designed very deliberately to make certain people feel at home and certain other people feel like they had wandered in by mistake. William Ashford saw none of it. He stood at the front desk, with his wet coat dripping quietly onto the floor and his bouquet of white lilies resting against the counter's edge. He had carried those flowers through 3 blocks of driving rain without once shifting them away from his chest. They were slightly crushed at the stems now, the white petals still holding their shape still clean. He didn't seem to notice the water pooling at his feet, or the way the nearest bellhop had glanced at the puddle and then very deliberately looked somewhere else. The receptionist behind the desk was in her late 20s, precise in the way that people are precise when they've been trained to perform precision. Her name tag read, Sophie. Her hair was pulled back without a strand out of place. Her smile was already in place before William finished his sentence. The professional kind, assembled so quickly and held so steadily that it had stopped resembling a smile and become something more like a position. He asked for a single room. One night, Sophie's eyes moved over him, the way a scanner moves over a document, quick, efficient looking for what doesn't belong. The worn coat, the scuffed bag hanging from one shoulder, its canvas darkened with rain, the flowers that had clearly not come from a hotel gift shop. She glanced once at the screen in front of her, then back at William. "I'm sorry, sir. We're fully booked this evening." William's gaze moved briefly to the monitor angled behind her desk. From where he stood, he could make out the soft green glow of available room indicators, a full column of them, unselected waiting. He said nothing about it. He simply looked back at Sophie and nodded, once the way a man nods when he has heard something he already suspected. He didn't move. Sophie's smile held though something behind it shifted. She reached for a brochure on the side of the desk, a reflexive gesture, the kind used to signal that a conversation is wrapping up, and set it on the counter between them with a quiet authority that was meant to feel like helpfulness. Before she could say anything else, the revolving door behind William turned again, and the temperature of the entire lobby seemed to rise 2 degrees. The Harringtons came in the way wealthy people enter rooms they've already decided belong to them. The man had silver hair and a cashmere overcoat, the color of charcoal, cut close and pressed sharp. The woman beside him wore a coat that matched a shade lighter, her heels striking the stone floor in a clean, confident rhythm that carried across the entire lobby. They didn't check in so much as arrive moving toward the desk with the easy certainty of people who have never once been told there was nothing available for them and would be genuinely confused if it happened. Sophie's whole posture changed. Her spine straightened differently. The brochure went back to its place on the counter without comment. "Mr. and Mrs. Harrington." Her voice carried genuine warmth, now the kind that doesn't show up in training manuals. "We've been expecting you. Your suite is ready." She produced the key card for the presidential suite and laid it on the counter with both hands, as though presenting something precious. The Harringtons exchanged a brief, satisfied look, the look of people confirming a belief they already held. The exchange took under 2 minutes. No questions asked about the length of their stay, their form of payment, whether they needed assistance with their luggage. Just the card, the smile, and a small bow of the head that Sophie hadn't offered anyone else that evening. William watched all of it. He watched the way Sophie's shoulders dropped half an inch when the Harringtons approached the physical release of someone shifting from performance into something closer to genuine engagement. He watched the porter materialize from nowhere with a brass luggage cart stacked 4 bags high, moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been quietly monitoring the situation and knew exactly when to appear. He watched the Harringtons move toward the elevator without once looking back at the man standing at the counter with wet shoes and a bouquet of lilies, because there was no version of their world in which he registered as someone worth looking back at. He was still standing in the same spot when the elevator doors closed behind them. The lobby returned to its usual murmur heels on stone low conversation, the distant sound of a piano being played somewhere near the bar, something slow and unhurried that floated through the warm air like it had nowhere particular to be. William turned back to the desk. Sophie was already looking at her screen fingers, poised at the keyboard, giving every impression of a person who had moved on entirely. "I'd still like a room," William said. Sophie looked up. For just a moment the smile slipped, not dramatically, barely enough to notice just a brief failure of the mechanism before it reassembled itself into something that now carried a faint additional quality. Not quite impatience, something more precise than that. The quality of a person who has decided that patience itself is a form of condescension being extended. "Sir, as I mentioned, we are fully booked." She spoke clearly, deliberately clearly, with a careful projection that carried beyond the immediate space between them. The couple checking in at the second desk glanced over. A man in a business suit standing nearby with his phone looked up. "Our rates begin at $700 per night, but as there's truly nothing available this evening, I'd suggest trying a hotel better suited to—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. The shape of it was already in the air, complete and legible to everyone who had heard it. William let it sit there. He looked at Sophie for a long moment. Not with anger. Anger would have been simpler, would have given her something to manage. Not with embarrassment. Embarrassment would have confirmed what she'd implied. He looked at her with the expression of a man who is cataloging something, carefully setting it somewhere in his memory, where it will keep. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his coat, removed a small framed photograph, and set it face down on the counter beside the lilies. His hand rested on top of it, flat and still. "I'd like to speak with the manager," he said. The request was so quiet, so completely without performance, that it landed harder than a raised voice would have. It was the kind of quiet that doesn't ask for anything. It simply occupies space and waits to see what the space does with it. Sophie's fingers stopped moving on the keyboard. "Of course," she said after a beat. "I can let him know you're waiting." She picked up the desk phone and turned slightly away, keeping her voice low. William straightened the lilies against the counter. The stems had bent slightly in the rain, 2 of them angled out of line with the rest. He adjusted them carefully, not fussing, just correcting, then set them back down and stood with his hands loose at his sides. Across the lobby, a young man in a bellhop uniform had been watching the exchange from his post near the staircase. His name tag read, Owen. He was in his early 20s, lean with close-cut hair, and the kind of stillness that doesn't come from boredom, but from paying close attention to a situation and choosing not to act until the right moment. He had seen the green squares on Sophie's screen from across the room, not clearly, but clearly enough. He had watched the Harringtons receive their key card. He had heard Sophie's voice carry when she mentioned the rate. He had watched the man at the counter absorb all of it without flinching, and he had arrived quietly and without announcing it at a conclusion. Owen reached into his jacket pocket and found his personal phone. He typed a short, careful message, not to the floor supervisor, not to HR, to a name he had stored on his third day of work, given to him by a senior concierge over coffee in the break room. The concierge had written the name on a napkin and slid it across the table and said, without drama, "If anything ever goes seriously wrong in that lobby, and you'll know when it's serious, this is who you call. Don't wait. Just call." Owen sent the message. He pocketed his phone. He went back to watching. At the desk, Sophie replaced the receiver and turned back to William with a smile that had been carefully reconstructed from its component parts. "Our general manager will be with you shortly," she said. "You're welcome to take a seat in the lounge." William glanced toward the lounge low-leather chairs, soft lighting a waiter, moving between tables, with the quiet focus of someone who has mastered the art of being present without being noticed. Then he looked back at Sophie. "I'll wait here," he said. He picked up the face-down photograph from the counter and slid it back into the inside pocket of his coat, then rested one hand against the fabric for a moment before letting it fall back to his side. He waited. Sophie looked at the front of his coat for a moment, then turned to her screen. The lobby moved around William, the way water moves around a stone, guests arriving and departing staff, crossing the floor with quiet purpose, the piano still threading its unhurried line through the air above it all. He stood through all of it, without shifting his weight, without checking his phone, without doing any of the things people do when they are uncomfortable and trying not to show it. He wasn't uncomfortable. He was simply waiting, in the way that people wait when they have already decided what they are waiting for. He had made his choice the moment Sophie turned away to call the manager. He could have walked out into the rain and found another hotel. There were dozens within 10 blocks, ranging from the merely expensive to the genuinely ordinary, and any of them would have given him a room without ceremony. He could have let the night pass quietly the way he had let many nights pass. These last 6 years alone, unremarkable, moving through the world without leaving much of a mark on it. Grief does that to some people. It had done it to him. After Clara died, he had stepped back from everything, the business, the board, the city, the name on the buildings, and become, by deliberate degrees, someone nobody recognized in a lobby. It would have been easier to leave. It would have been what the old version of him might have chosen, the one who believed that quiet endurance was its own kind of dignity. But Clara had not built this place so that its lobby could be used to make a man feel small in front of a room full of strangers. And William had made her a promise 6 years ago, sitting beside a hospital bed, while the city went on outside the window, indifferent and continuous. He had promised her he would go back, that he would check on it, that he would make sure the thing they had built together was still the thing they had intended it to be. He had taken 6 years to keep that promise. He wasn't going to leave before he'd kept it. The elevator across the lobby opened with a clean chime, and a man in a dark suit stepped out, straightening his cuffs as he crossed the floor with the long, deliberate stride of someone who manages problems for a living and has learned that pace communicates authority. Gregory Voss, general manager of the Ashford Grand, was in his late 40s, broad-shouldered, with the kind of face that was handsome in a way that had been carefully maintained. He had been running this property for 4 years and had, by most measurable standards, run it well. Occupancy up, reviews strong, staff turnover lower than the industry average. He was good at his job in the way that a machine can be good at its function efficiently, consistently, and without any particular feeling about it. He approached the front desk, took one look at William, the coat, the bag, the lilies, the hand resting quietly against his chest, and drew his conclusions before either of them had spoken a word. The conclusions were wrong, but they were drawn with the confidence of a man who has learned to trust his first read of a room and has not yet been given a reason to stop. "Good evening, sir." Gregory's voice was practiced, and even the vocal equivalent of a firm handshake. "I understand there may be some confusion about availability this evening. I've looked into the matter, and unfortunately, my colleague is correct. We are not in a position to accommodate a walk-in reservation at this time." William looked at him steadily. "The screen behind your receptionist showed available rooms when I walked in." Gregory's expression didn't shift. "Our system updates in real time. What appeared available may have been held for confirmed reservations, not yet reflected in the display." "The Harringtons weren't a confirmed reservation," William said. "They walked in 40 seconds after I did and received a keycard without a single question. The Harringtons are valued long-standing guests of this property." Gregory kept his voice pleasant, measured, carrying just enough to be heard by anyone in the immediate vicinity who might be paying attention. "I'm certain you understand how guest relationships work in a property of this caliber." William understood perfectly. He understood all of it, what was being said, what wasn't being said, and the precise social machinery that Gregory was operating with such practiced ease. He had designed that machinery himself 30 years ago, and it had never been intended to work this way. Gregory clasped his hands in front of him in a gesture that was meant to signal finality delivered graciously. "I'd be delighted to recommend several other properties in the area that may be a better fit for your needs this evening. We can arrange a car, if that would be." "That won't be necessary," William said. The pleasantness in Gregory's expression developed a faint additional layer, the professional equivalent of a locked door, behind a polite smile. He gave a short, almost imperceptible nod toward the two security staff positioned near the main entrance. Both men began moving toward the desk, with the careful, measured pace of people who have done this before and know how to make it look routine. The lobby, without quite meaning to, went a degree quieter. It happened the way these things always happen, gradually, then all at once. The couple at the second check-in desk stopped mid-sentence. The woman near the lounge entrance turned from her companion. The man in the business suit who had put his phone away took it back out, then seemed to think better of it, then held it uncertainly at his side. William noticed the security staff. He noticed the people who had stopped pretending not to watch. He noticed Sophie behind the desk, fingers suspended above her keyboard, her posture carrying the particular tension of someone waiting for something to resolve in a direction they can live with. He noticed Owen Price still at his post by the staircase, watching with that same careful, measuring stillness. William did not move. He did not raise his voice. He reached into the inside pocket of his coat and took out the photograph. He looked at it for a moment, not long, just long enough. And then he turned it over and set it flat on the counter, face up, directly beneath the portrait that hung on the wall above and behind Sophie's station. Sophie saw it first. Her fingers dropped away from the keyboard, as if the keys had become suddenly warm. Gregory Voss was still speaking something about hotel policy, something about the late hour and the inconvenience of the situation, when Sophie's expression stopped him more effectively than any interruption could have. He turned, following the line of her gaze, and looked at the photograph on the counter. In it, a young William Ashford, dark-haired and sharp-eyed, standing in front of this very building on the day it opened. His posture was exactly the same as it was right now. That same quality of stillness, that same lack of performance. Beside him, a woman in a cream dress held one handle of a large pair of golden scissors, her other hand resting lightly on William's arm. She was laughing at something happening off camera, her head tilted slightly to the left, and the laugh was the kind that couldn't have been staged, too unguarded, too mid-something. And just visible at the left edge of the frame, slightly out of focus, a younger woman in a dark blazer stood holding a clipboard, already looking at something that needed attention, already working. Above the photograph, mounted in a gilded frame on the wall behind Sophie's desk, the same woman in the cream dress looked out across the lobby. Older in the portrait, her hair lighter, her expression quieter, but still carrying that same quality of mid-something, even rendered in oil paint. The brass plate beneath the portrait read, Clara Ashford, co-founder. The golden scissors from the photograph were mounted in a glass display case beside the portrait, polished and still. Gregory Voss looked at the photograph. He looked at the portrait. He looked at the display case. He looked at William Ashford standing in front of him in a worn coat, with wet shoes and a bouquet of bent lilies. And for the first time since he had stepped off the elevator, the careful architecture of his professional composure showed a crack. He did not say anything. William picked the photograph up from the counter, slid it back into his coat pocket, and looked at Gregory with an expression that was not anger, not satisfaction, not grief, not triumph. It was patience. The very long, very quiet kind. The kind that has been carried a long time and knows it doesn't need to hurry. "I'd still like to speak with someone," William said. "If there's anyone else available." Gregory Voss recovered the way trained managers recover quickly, with just enough composure to make the recovery look like it had never been necessary in the first place. "Sir," he said, his voice dropping to register, intended only for the two of them. "I think it would be best if we continued this conversation somewhere more private. My office is just— I'm fine here," William said. Gregory's jaw tightened by a fraction, the only visible sign of a recalibration happening somewhere behind the professional surface. He glanced at the spot on the counter where the photograph had been, and then at the portrait above Sophie's station, and his eyes moved between the 2 points, the way a man's eyes move when he is running a calculation he doesn't want to complete. But the calculation required certainty, and certainty required a closer look at a small photograph in warm lobby lighting, and Gregory Voss was not yet ready to accept what a closer look might confirm. The man in front of him was wearing a coat that belonged to a different category of guest entirely. That was what Gregory had been trained to see. That was what he had seen from the moment the elevator doors opened. It was possible, preferable, that there was another explanation for the photograph. Coincidence, a resemblance, a print bought somewhere. Gregory chose the other explanation. He straightened his cuffs and gave a short nod to the security staff who had positioned themselves on either side of William at a distance that was professional rather than threatening, close enough to act far enough to seem reasonable. "I'm going to have to ask you to come with us, sir," Gregory said. "If you'd like to follow up through our guest services line tomorrow morning, someone will be—" "I'm not a guest," William said. "Not yet." The distinction seemed to briefly confuse Gregory like a key that almost fits. He recovered. "Be that as it may." He gave the security staff a nod that was barely more than a shift in his chin. The taller of the two broad-shouldered name tag reading Marcus reached for William's bag. It was a practiced motion, designed to read as helpful a firm hand on the strap, a suggestion of direction toward the door. His hand closed around the canvas and pulled. The bag snagged. The strap caught the corner bracket of the front desk, a small brass fitting that jutted out just far enough at just the wrong angle, and when Marcus pulled upward, the bag twisted sharply, the top flap jerked open, and the weight of the interior redistributed all at once. William's wallet came free from the outer pocket and dropped straight down, hitting the polished floor with a flat, definitive sound. It landed open. A photograph slid out wallet-sized, worn at the corners, the same image as the framed one, but smaller, carried differently, the kind of copy a person keeps, not for display, but for proximity. It landed face up directly beneath the chandelier, catching the warm downlight cleanly. Nobody moved. The image was visible from several feet in every direction. A younger William, dark-haired, that same stillness in the posture. Clara beside him with the golden scissors, laughing, the cream dress bright against the stone facade of this building on the day it opened. The same facade that was visible right now through the lobby's front windows, if anyone cared to turn and look. Marcus released the bag strap. He took one deliberate step back, and the movement had the quality of a decision rather than a reflex. William crouched down without hurry, picked up his wallet, and retrieved the photograph from the floor. He looked at it for a moment, brief. Private, the look of a man touching something that belongs to a different part of his life, then folded it with care and pressed it back into his wallet. He stood. He settled the bag back onto his shoulder, adjusted the strap, and turned to face Gregory Voss. Gregory was looking at the spot on the floor where the photograph had been. Something had moved in his expression. It wasn't recognition, yet not fully, but it was the precursor to recognition, the particular unease of a man who can feel the ground shifting underfoot without yet being able to say in which direction. Around them, the lobby had gone quiet in the way that lobbies go quiet when something real is happening. Not the anticipatory quiet of people waiting for a show, but the involuntary quiet of people who have understood, without being told, that they are witnessing something that matters. The couple at the second check-in desk had stopped mid-sentence. The woman near the lounge entrance had set her glass down on a nearby ledge and forgotten about it. A group of 4 near the staircase had drifted almost imperceptibly closer to the front desk over the last several minutes, the way people drift toward things they don't want to admit they're watching, and the phones. They had been rising gradually, not aggressively, not with the pointed intention of people trying to capture something for an audience, but with the instinctive quiet lift of people who sense that what they are watching is the kind of thing that should be remembered. Owen Price stood at his post and did not record anything. He had sent a second message not to the floor supervisor, not to the person he'd contacted first, but directly to the name on the napkin. The message was 4 words: "He's still in lobby." He pocketed his phone. He folded his hands in front of him. He waited with the particular patience of someone who has done the right thing and now simply has to trust it. Gregory Voss made his decision. Whatever he had almost understood, he chose for the last time not to understand it. The lobby was watching. The situation had gone on too long. The man in front of him was still, by every measure Gregory had trained himself to apply, an unknown individual who had produced a small photograph, proving nothing he was yet prepared to accept. "Sir." Gregory's pleasantness had thinned to something harder underneath. "I need to ask you to leave the premises now." Marcus and the second guard, younger name tag reading Daniel, moved to flank William with more intention this time. No suggestion of helpfulness now, just direction. 3 steps. That was all that separated William Ashford from the revolving door and the rain beyond it. 3 steps, and this would be over in the way that things are over when the truth doesn't get to finish its sentence. Gregory would ride the elevator back to his office. Sophie would close out her screen. The lobby would reassemble itself around its own silence. And tomorrow night and the night after that, the same sequence would be available to anyone who walked through those doors in the wrong coat. William took 1 step toward the exit. He stopped. He stood still for a moment, not hesitating, not reconsidering, simply standing in the particular stillness of a man who has arrived at a decision that was always going to be this one. He turned around. Marcus extended a hand to redirect him, and William looked at it with such complete, unhurried calm that Marcus withdrew it of his own accord a second before he understood why. William walked back to the front desk, not quickly, not with any performance of purpose. He walked the way he had walked in from the rain, steady, quiet, taking up exactly the space he needed, and no more. He stopped at the counter directly beneath the portrait of his wife and set the bouquet of white lilies down between himself and Sophie, with the care of someone placing something in the right location after carrying it a long distance. Then he reached into his coat and took out the framed photograph for the 3rd time that evening. He laid it flat on the counter face up and positioned it beside the lilies carefully without drama, so that both the photograph and the portrait were visible in the same direct sight line from anywhere in the front half of the lobby. The photograph on the counter, the portrait on the wall, the same woman, the same golden scissors, the same building on the same corner on the day it first opened its doors. Sophie looked at the photograph. She looked up at the portrait. She looked back at the photograph. And the color left her face the way color leaves a room when someone turns off the wrong light, suddenly completely without any possibility of being walked back. Her mouth opened. Nothing came. Gregory Voss had followed William back to the desk. He was 4 feet away, the next instruction already forming, when he caught the edge of Sophie's expression and stopped. He turned to follow her gaze and looked at the photograph. He looked at the portrait. He looked at the display case beside the portrait, where the golden scissors sat behind glass. He looked at William Ashford. The lobby was absolutely still. Somewhere behind it, all the piano was still playing soft, unhurried, completely indifferent to what was happening 40 feet away. The rain was still coming down outside. The chandelier above threw the same warm, even light it had been throwing all evening. Everything was exactly as it had been an hour ago, and nothing was the same. William straightened up from the counter. He did not look at Gregory. He did not look at Sophie. He looked at the portrait, at the laughing woman in the cream dress, at the woman who had sat across a kitchen table from him on a Sunday morning 30 years ago, and said quietly over coffee, "If we do this, we do it right, or we don't do it at all." And he held her there for a moment. In the light of the lobby, she had spent the best part of her life building. Then he turned to the room, not to Gregory, not to Sophie, to the room. "You were going to have me removed," he said. His voice was even unhurried, carrying without effort to every corner of the lobby. 3 steps from the door. Not because the hotel was full, it wasn't. Not because I had done anything wrong, I hadn't. Because of how I looked when I walked in. Gregory opened his mouth. "I'm not asking for a response," William said. Not harshly. Simply. "I'm saying it out loud, in this lobby, so that everyone in this room can hear it, and so that it is said." He let that sit. Clara built this place on one principle above everything else. It didn't matter how a guest arrived. It didn't matter what they were carrying, or what they were wearing, or what kind of car they stepped out of, or whether they came in from the rain on foot. Every person who walked through those doors was owed the same thing. He looked at the portrait again briefly. Dignity. From the first moment, Sophie's hands had come off the keyboard entirely. She was gripping the counter's edge now, and the expression on her face had moved past shock and past fear, and arrived somewhere more difficult, the expression of someone who has just seen themselves from the outside and found the view genuinely hard to hold. Gregory Voss had no managed response. For the first time in 4 years behind this desk, the professional register that had served him in every difficult situation had simply stopped functioning. He stood in the lobby of the Ashford Grand and was stripped of everything else, a man who had made a very large mistake in front of a very large number of witnesses, and who was beginning to understand exactly how large both of those things were. On the far side of the lobby, Owen Price stood at his post, with his hands folded in front of him, and waited. The elevator opened with a clean, familiar chime. Eleanor Marsh crossed the lobby, the way she had crossed it every working day for 4 decades, without announcement, without theater, with the particular quality of presence that belongs to people who have never needed a room to know they were there. She was in her 60s, with close-cropped silver hair and the posture of someone who has spent a long time meaning every word she says. Charcoal blazer, dark blouse, a watch on her left wrist that had been there so long it seemed like part of her. She did not look at Gregory as she passed him. She did not look at Sophie. She walked directly to the front desk and stopped beside William Ashford and looked at him the way you look at someone you haven't seen in a very long time, but have kept somewhere specific in your mind. "Mr. Ashford." Her voice moved through the lobby without effort, the way sound moves through a room that has decided to listen. "Welcome home." 2 words. The lobby absorbed them slowly, a ripple moving outward, one person turning to the next, one phone completing its rise to filming position, one woman near the lounge, letting out a breath she had been holding without realizing it. What followed wasn't a gasp or an exclamation. It was something quieter than either of those and more complete. It was the sound of a room full of people revising simultaneously everything they thought they had just witnessed. Gregory Voss did not move. His hands clasped in front of him tightened. Sophie took a half step back from the counter, not retreating exactly, but her body making a decision that had nothing to do with professional composure and everything to do with simple human response to consequence. William looked at Eleanor. Something in his face shifted, barely perceptible, just enough to be visible to someone standing close. Not relief. Not vindication. Something older and quieter than either of those. The recognition that belongs to people who have been carrying something for a long time and have, for one moment, set it down in the right place. "Eleanor," he said. She reached out and pressed his hand once. Brief. Then let go. She turned to the room. "My name is Eleanor Marsh," she said with the calm directness of someone delivering a briefing. "I am the director of operations of the Ashford Grand. The gentleman beside me is William Ashford, founder of this hotel and every property in the Ashford collection." One beat. "He came here tonight as a private individual. He asked for a single room. He was told we were fully booked." She looked at the booking screen behind Sophie's station. The green squares were still there, still lit, still waiting, still unselected. "We were not fully booked," Eleanor said. The rain against the lobby's exterior windows was audible now. It had been there the whole time underneath everything else. Nobody had noticed it until the room went quiet enough to hear it. Gregory Voss unclenched his hands. He took a breath. "Mr. Voss." Eleanor turned to him, and her tone did not change it. Stayed even precise, almost gentle, especially that last quality. Especially gentle. "Please go to your office. Leave your access credentials with the front desk. Someone from HR will contact you in the morning." Gregory stood very still for a moment. There was nothing to say. No managed response that the situation could absorb, no professional register left to operate from. He straightened his jacket, nodded once, a reflex, the last piece of trained behavior still functioning, and walked to the elevator without a word. He pressed the button. The doors opened immediately, as though they had been waiting. He stepped inside. The lobby watched him go with the particular silence reserved for exits that cannot be taken back. The doors closed. The indicator above the elevator climbed floor by floor until it stopped. Eleanor turned to Sophie. Sophie Hale was 28 years old and had worked at the Ashford Grand for 3 years, without a formal complaint, without a written warning, without a single measurable blemish on her record. She was punctual. She was efficient. Her guest satisfaction scores were strong consistently among guests who matched the profile she had learned, whether she was aware of learning it or not to serve without friction. Tonight she had told a man in a worn coat that the hotel was fully booked, while available rooms glowed on the screen behind her. She had pitched her voice so the rate carried across the lobby. She had let a sentence end where it ended in the air unfinished because it didn't need to be finished to do its work. She knew all of this. It was on her face, not as performance, not as fear of what came next, but as the specific expression of someone who has seen themselves from the outside for the first time and found the view genuinely difficult to inhabit. Eleanor looked at her for a moment without speaking. She let the moment be what it was. "Starting tomorrow, you'll be on administrative leave," Eleanor said. "When you return, it will be in a different capacity with a mandatory retraining program. What happens after that depends on what you do with it." She held Sophie's gaze. "That is not a punishment. That is an open door. I'd strongly suggest walking through it." "Yes, ma'am," Sophie said. Her voice was steady. Her jaw was tight. Her eyes remained dry, which cost her something visible. Eleanor turned and crossed the lobby toward the staircase. Owen Price had not moved from his post. He stood, as he had stood for the past 40 minutes, hands folded, expression neutral, watching. When Eleanor stopped in front of him, he straightened instinctively. "You sent me 2 messages tonight," Eleanor said. "The first told me something was wrong. The second told me who was involved." She looked at him directly, the way she looked at everything without softening it, without adding anything unnecessary. "You didn't step in and make it about yourself. You didn't record it and decide what to do with that later. You found the right person, and you let the situation resolve the way it needed to resolve. She let that land. That's not a small thing. Most people don't know the difference." Owen said nothing. He understood that no response was required. "Come see me Thursday morning," Eleanor said. 9 o'clock. We're going to talk about the management development program." She turned back to the lobby. Then she turned to William. He had stood through all of it in the same position, one hand resting on the counter's edge, not gripping it, simply resting. Coat still damp at the shoulders. The lilies still on the counter beside him, petals intact, stems slightly bent. He had not moved, had not spoken, had let the room do what the room needed to do. Now Eleanor walked back to him, and the lobby, having held its breath for a long time, seemed to quietly exhale. "I can have a room ready in 15 minutes, she said, her voice dropping to something that was only for him. "The best one in the building. Or I'll have a car brought around wherever you want to go." William looked at the portrait of Clara for a long moment, at the laughing woman with the golden scissors, at the cream dress, the tilted head, the hand that was steady even mid-laugh. Then he looked at the lilies. He picked them up carefully, both hands the way you pick up something that has traveled a distance with you. "I'd like to ask you something," he said. Eleanor waited. "Tomorrow morning," William said. "First thing before the lobby opens, would you put these in water and set them under her portrait?" Eleanor looked at the flowers in his hands. Something moved in her expression. Not grief, not sentiment exactly, but the quiet acknowledgement of something that had been true for a long time and was now being honored in the right way. "Every Tuesday," she said, "if you'd like." William considered that. Something in his face settled. He set the lilies back on the counter gently and took a moment to straighten the stems. He picked up his bag and adjusted the strap. He looked at Eleanor with the expression of a man who has finished something that needed finishing. Not triumphantly, not with relief exactly, but with the particular quiet that belongs to tasks carried a long way and set down in the right place. "Thank you, Eleanor." "Thank you for coming back," she said. He walked across the lobby the way he had walked in, steady, unhurried, without performance. Past the front desk, past the portrait, past the display case with the golden scissors, past the spot on the floor, now unmarked, where his wallet had fallen and been retrieved. He pushed through the revolving door and stepped back out into the rain. 3 blocks east, the Milford Hotel occupied the ground floor, and 4 stories above it of a building that had been there since the 1950s and looked like it. The entrance was marked by a hand-painted sign slightly uneven, and the lobby was a single room, a counter with a computer, a rack of keycards, 2 chairs against the wall, a burgundy carpet worn to the backing along the path between the door and the elevator. The lighting was fluorescent. It did not attempt atmosphere. It simply illuminated things. The woman at the front desk was at the far end of a long shift. Her name tag was on slightly crooked, angled 2 degrees off horizontal in a way that suggested the evening had been eventful, or she was tired, or both. She had a coffee cup at her elbow that was 3/4 empty, and a paperback novel turned face down beside her keyboard, its spine creased from a long relationship with being carried in a bag. When William came through the door, she looked up with the unguarded expression of someone who had not been expecting anyone else tonight, and was genuinely uncertain whether that was good or bad. Then she took in the soaked coat and the expression on his face, and her own expression settled into something plain and practical and decent. "Evening," she said. Rough one out there. Getting worse, William said. She looked at the coat, the bag, the particular quality of someone who has been out in the rain for a while and has not complained about it. She turned to her computer and began typing with the efficient focus of someone who has one job and does it without embellishment. Single room one night. Please, William said, a few keystrokes. That'll be $112. Checkout's at 11. But if you need a bit more time, just come down and tell me, and we'll work it out. She slid a key card across the counter and looked up at him with the straightforward expression of someone for whom this transaction was exactly what it appeared to be. A man needed a room. She had a room. Here was the key. Here were the details. Is there anything else? 3rd floor, she said. Elevator's on your left. Ice machine's right across from it, though the ice is a little slow tonight. William stood at the counter for a moment. Not studying her. Not cataloging anything. Just standing there the way you stand when something has stopped being complicated. Thank you, he said. She smiled, not a trained smile, not a positioned one, the kind that happens at the end of a shift when you've done your work and done it honestly, and someone acknowledges it. Uncomplicated. Real. Have a good night, she said, and picked up her novel. William paid in cash. He rode the elevator to the 3rd floor. He found room 314, let himself in, set his bag on the chair by the window. He did not turn on the light. He sat on the edge of the bed in his damp coat and listened to the rain against the window, steadier now, more constant, the kind of rain that has decided it is in for the long haul and is no longer making any particular point about it. The room was small. The ceiling was plain. The streetlight from outside laid a pale rectangle across the carpet and stayed there. He thought about Clara, about the morning she had handed him the navy coat across the kitchen table, already late, already moving, already laughing at something she'd just thought of on the way from the bedroom. About the afternoon they had stood in front of a half-finished building on a street that looked nothing like it would look later, and she had said, if we do this, we do it right. Not as a condition, just as a statement of fact about who they were. About his daughter, who had called that afternoon and asked quietly whether he was sure he wanted to go alone. He had told her yes. He had told her some things you carry yourself at least the first time. She had said okay, and then she had said, call me after. He would call her in the morning. He would tell her it was done, about the last thing Clara had said to him, not knowing. It was the last thing, just saying it, the way she said most things clearly, and without ceremony, the way she said everything that mattered, go check on it sometime. Make sure it's still ours. He had taken 6 years, but he had gone, and he had checked, and now he knew. William Ashford took off his coat and folded it carefully over the back of the chair. He lay down on the bed of a $112 room in a hotel that didn't carry his name, and he was asleep before the rain let up. The video appeared online before midnight. A guest in the lobby had been recording from the moment the wallet fell. 3 minutes and 40 seconds of unsteady, honest footage shot from 20 feet away. Audio slightly muffled, but legible. It was posted without commentary, without a caption beyond a single line that read, "This happened tonight at the Ashford Grand in Manhattan." By morning, it had been viewed 4 million times. By the end of the week, 30 million shared in 17 languages with comment threads that ran to tens of thousands of entries and kept running. Most of them said variations of the same thing. Gregory Voss did not return to the hospitality industry. He left the city the following month. The people who had worked under him noted privately that they were not surprised and that they were sorry it had taken this long and that they hoped the next place would be better. Sophie Hale came back to the Ashford Grand 9 months later. Different desk, different role, every component of the retraining program completed. The guests she served in her first week back noted in their feedback cards that she was unusually attentive, that she seemed to actually look at them when they spoke. which sounds like a small thing and is not a small thing. One card read, "She made me feel like the only person in the room." Sophie kept that card. She put it in her wallet, in the same slot where her employee discount card used to be, the Clara Standard. The name Eleanor gave to the revised code of conduct she developed and rolled out across all 14 Ashford properties over the following year was a single page. It did not use the word luxury once. It used the word dignity 11 times. Every new employee at every property received it on their first day, folded inside their welcome packet alongside their schedule and their parking information. Most of them read it twice. Owen Price walked into Eleanor Marsh's office on a Thursday morning at exactly 9 o'clock and walked out 40 minutes later with an enrollment confirmation for the Ashford Management Development Program. 18 months after that, he was named assistant manager of front-of-house operations at the Ashford Grand. He was 25 years old, which made him the youngest person to hold the role in the property's history. He did not mention this to anyone. Every Tuesday morning, without instruction from anyone, Owen stopped at the florist, 2 blocks south of the hotel, before his shift began. He bought a bunch of white lilies, always. White, always. Fresh, and carried them in himself. He trimmed the stems at the sink in the back hallway, filled a glass vase with clean water, and set it beneath Clara Ashford's portrait before the lobby opened. He never explained it. No one ever asked, and every Tuesday when the first guests of the morning came through the revolving door and crossed the lobby toward the front desk, the white lilies were already there, bright against the wall beneath the portrait of the woman who had built the place, as if they had always been there, as if they always would be.